The one thing you want to keep in mind is that the ability to play hands is not based on your specific hand, but your relative hand strength. Few hands are on each side of the spectrum, meaning you're absolutely going to play them or you're never going to play them. Aces, you're always going to play. Seven deuce off, you're never going to play. Other hands that fall in the middle, like Jack 10 suited, depend on which position you're in. So you want to use what's called a sliding scale, meaning you decide which hands to play based on the strength of the hand, the people at the table, and most importantly, what position you're in. So a hand that is absolutely a monster on the button, like Ace Jack offsuit is a great hand, is a terrible hand to play from first position. So the later you are at the table, the more hands that you can afford to play profitably.
So the best and worst thing about position is that it defines who has control in the hand. When we're in position, we can control almost every aspect from how much we bet to how much we call. But when we're out of position, we're at the mercy of the in-position player and what they want to do.
Now, position is incredibly important because with position comes additional information for you to act with. So if you're in position on the flop and your opponent checks and then calls your bet, whether you were bluffing or not, well, at least you're going to get to the turn with positional advantage once again. So again, you get more information to act with on the turn than they have. On the river, more information once again.
Well, position matters because you want to be able to see what your opponent does before you have to make a decision. When you have more information, it just allows you to make a better informed decision.
Position is important because it allows you to act last. Now, that doesn't sound all that powerful, but being able to determine if you put in one additional bet is highly relevant because especially in pots or games where the pots grow exponentially, being able to make the pot much larger whenever you feel like it, whether you have the nuts or a bluff, is highly, highly valuable.
So there's a ton of value in having the opportunity to act last after all of your opponents. It gives you extra information. It allows you to pot control. So say for example, early position opens and you have pocket deuces under the gun +1. You might not always have the implied odds to set mine, but if under the gun opens and you're on the button and there's 3 or 4 callers in between, then you can profitably call knowing that you have the odds to set mine. So that's just one example of why position matters.
Position matters for a number of reasons. There are a number of advantages to acting after our opponent on every street. The first is that when we have a good hand, it's easier to get value when we're in position. The second reason is if we want to bluff, we can pick better bluff spots in position after our opponent checks to us, rather than when we're out of position and we have no indication yet as to the strength of our opponent's hand. But the biggest reason by far, and the biggest advantage for being in position, is that when we're in position and our opponent checks, when we have a marginal hand, we can check behind and we get to realize our equity. Whereas when we're out of position and we check, our opponent will often bet and we have to fold our hand and our equity.
So that's a bit of a summary from the pros, and I think it's really helpful to hear from them to add some context to this. And to summarize, and I want to open this up to some panel conversation here to thinking about why position matters. But the way I've always thought of it is when you're in position, you have more information, you have more opportunity to bluff, you have more opportunity to capture value when you have value, and you have more opportunity to get to showdown, so you have more control. So all of those things add up to a sort of an equity advantage where you have more opportunities to either win hands where you're behind or capture value where you're ahead, or get yourself to showdown when you've got sort of a marginal made hand. I don't know if anybody else has anything that they really think about when they think about position and why it's so important in the game to understand.
One of the things I often think about, and I think this came from one of David Sklansky's books, is that one of the powers of position is that when you're in position, you tend to be able to win bigger pots, and you tend to be able to lose smaller pots. So just magnifying that one thing makes a huge difference to your win rate. When you're behind, you're not going to lose as much. When you're ahead, you're going to win more.
And I think it's important to consider that position matters a lot across every street. It's personally, my opening ranges, for instance, are extremely sensitive to position. But even just post flop, as the guys were saying there, the ability to control the size of the pot, the ability to pick spots on later streets to make a bluff because you've got all this new information where you can sense weakness in their post flop play. It really is a factor on every street.
One of the things that we didn't talk about too much yet, but I consider is when you're last act, you have all that information. You have the ability to get free cards that other people don't have the ability to get. Because if everybody checks to you and you have one of those hands where you just want to see the next card free, you have that opportunity where you don't have that when you're out of position. Because somebody on the, in a later position has the opportunity to bet, and now you're either calling or folding. So one of the things is calculating odds and being able to get free cards when you want.
Yeah, and I liked how our pro started off. Alec Torelli, I mean, he kind of calmly said it, but he was talking about all the things that are kind of important when thinking about a poker hand. And he kind of slyly just said it. Most importantly, there's position. And then we have a lot of other people kind of talking about this. And position is insanely important for all these reasons. I mean, how many people on our pro panel that we got to say something just said, hey, it's all about information. Poker's a game of information. When you're the last person to act, you have one more piece of information than everyone else does. And then we also heard a lot of, I think both Jonathan Little and Dara O'Kearney kind of said the same thing, but in two different ways. Jonathan Little said, you have the value of getting that last bet in the pot. Typically, the last bet is always the biggest one, most important. When you have a made hand, you get to decide how big that bet is going to be. And then Dara also said, you can control it when you have that middling strength hand. You don't have to face a bet all the time. You may be the last person to act and can just check behind a medium strength hand that's made but doesn't necessarily want to play a huge pot. So it's kind of like all these things culminating together, just talking about how important position can be.
Yeah, that reminds me. One last thing I've heard said is that no matter how important you think position is, it's more important than that.
I like that because it is one of these things that you kind of take for granted, and you kind of build these strategies up, but it's so important to kind of every choice you make. And the thing that I don't think I appreciated, the thing that also I liked what you said, Jim, too, is just about this idea that it cascades into sort of every street. So you have that initial decision you make. Well, I'm in this position, nobody's open, so I'm going to open. And if you open a kind of a marginal hand that you might have I'm feeling lucky here, or I'm going to take a chance here, or something like that. And you open a hand that you shouldn't be opening from whatever position you're starting from. That decision can cascade throughout the entire hand, and it can cost you increasingly more as the hand goes on. So I think it's something to keep in mind. It's why these sort of why people sort of hammer this home is it's really important to keep that discipline as you kind of learn these things and as you're kind of growing as a player.
Now, one of the things I think about is when I first started playing poker, I didn't know what position meant. It wasn't even a concept. All I knew was the two cards I had in front of me. And if I liked those two cards, I was going to play them no matter what. I didn't really care. And I didn't realize how much value I was giving away by playing those marginal hands in early position. I mean, they look great when as just the strength of the hand by itself, but when you combine it with the position, they become weaker and weaker. So That's one of the, I think, the most important things I learned as I was on this poker journey early on is it's not just about your hand strength. It has to do with your position also.
Yeah, my first running aces tournament, most serious running aces was about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And I had not studied at all. I just showed up. I qualified into the anniversary tournament, and I had a really deep run, but I learned all the wrong lessons because I was just getting smacked in the face with the deck. So I was opening like king three suited under the gun. And I was like, and I hit a flush, and I was like, oh man, I'm amazing at this game. But I learned all the wrong lessons from that. And ever since then, I was not very positionally aware until that caught up to me for a while. And I started to, realize why do I keep losing with king three of hearts all the time? And, it's one of those things that you have to be aware of as you play it.
It's such a good hand, and now I'm losing with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it worked that one time, so
Right.
it must be the right thing to do. And so, like, one of the things that, unless there's anything more there about that, I wanted to talk about what that actually means for how we start to consider position.